Welcome to a short preview of this Screencasts Online video tutorial.
Have you ever had a logo or other piece of artwork that looks great when it's small, but when you blow it up, it gets pixelated and looks terrible? That happens when you try to blow up a JPEG or PNG image. These kinds of images are made up of a specific number of pixels, and blowing up the image just makes the pixels larger. To circumvent this problem, we use vector graphic images instead. Vector graphic images are made up of true lines, circles, shapes, and text that scale to any size you want without degradation. If you want to make the occasional logo or graphic, it seems like overkill to buy Adobe Illustrator for $21 per month or Affinity Designer for $50. Just recently, Affinity Designer came to the iPad for $20. Now, all of these applications are highly capable, but that capability comes with high complexity. There's a steep learning curve, even to Affinity Designer for the iPad. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with these programs, but they might be overkill for your needs. And perhaps you'd like to experiment learning to use vector graphics before you invest in one of these products. The app I'd like to suggest is called Vectornator Pro from Vectornator.io. Vectornator Pro was designed from the ground up for iOS and runs on both iPad and iPhone. The application is very capable for those with modest needs, but is very easy to learn, and the application has recently become free with no in-app purchases required. If you're even the most casual user, I think Vectornator will be a useful tool to keep on your iOS device. I don't mean to downplay the capabilities of Vectornator Pro. If you're a more advanced vector graphics designer, I think you will be very pleasantly surprised at what you can accomplish with Vectornator Pro for iOS. I've opened up the App Store to show Vectornator Pro, and I've got it open on my 9.7-inch iPad Pro. Remember, you can run this on the iPhone or on larger iPads. I already have it installed, so I'll tap Open. When you first open the application, you'll be presented with the gallery, which shows you some examples of drawings that other people have created. You'll recognize the one that I showed in the introduction right here of an alien. Let me tap the button in the upper left to close and go back to the gallery. You'll also notice that you get a pop-up at the bottom that says, "Do you want to hear more about Vectornator?" We'll say no for now. In the upper left, we see a gear, and let me tap on that. And instead of settings, what this actually is a way to get in touch with the people who wrote Vectornator and get subscriptions to their newsletter. You can contact them. Most importantly, you can watch some tutorials, and you've got access to the manual and feature requests and follow them on social media. Let me tap the gear again. Over on the right, you see a plus button, but we also have a big plus that says New Document. Both of those do the same thing. Let me tap the plus in the menu bar first. You'll see that we have options for how to open our first document. We can create a custom size. We can import from Creative Cloud or iCloud. We can take something out of our photos library, and we can take a photo with our camera. The next row is to create new documents using standard screen sizes. You have options from standard screen up to Ultra HD, and if I swipe to the left, you'll see that we have iPad sizes, iPhone sizes. We've got the Apple Watch sizes as well. Let me slide that back to the right. And then we've got standard sizes of physical documents. We could create those as well. So if you know the size of the document that you're creating, you would be able to pick it from here. Up above, that's landscape formats, you'll notice, and now I can switch that over to portrait. Here are all the same options, except done in a portrait view. Let me put it back to landscape, and I'm going to cancel.
That's just a quick preview of one of this week's Apple-related tutorials from Screencasts Online. Screencasts Online is your premium source of Apple-related video tutorials. All of our members get access to brand new, up-to-date tutorials each week, as well as unlimited access to our entire video archive full of Mac and iOS-related tutorials. You can stream and download all of our videos on your Mac, iPad and iPhone, and even your Apple TV using the members-only Screencasts Online Apple TV app. Membership also includes a complimentary subscription to the digital Screencasts Online monthly magazine, published each month and packed with videos, articles, reviews, as well as hints and tips covering all aspects of the Mac, iPad, iPhone, and all of the other fantastic Apple products. So, if you're ready to start getting the most out of your Apple devices, visit screencastsonline.com today and become a Screencasts Online member.